Hi, Connor here with an Avid Visions photo fact of the week. This week I'm going to be talking about the Nikon D1 in honor of its 14th anniversary, as it was launched on June 15th, 1999. I'm talking about this camera because I think it's a really important historical step in photography because it kind of ushered in a digital age of photography, being one of the first digital cameras that professionals would use. When it was released, photographer Bjorn Rorslett said that this camera was the end of the beginning of the digital era and the beginning of the end of the film era. And I think that that's absolutely right, and that the D1 is really cool to look back upon because it shows just what we can do technologically to advance a medium in just under a decade and a half. So I'm going to start talking about the camera a little bit. When it was launched, it was just shy of $6,000 brand new, which is about as much as what a D4 costs new today, so that's not incredibly surprising until you kind of put it into the perspective of other things that were being sold at the time. So this was released in 1999, and it was based off of technology that Kodak made in the Kodak DCS 400 series. This is the Kodak DCS 460 that was launched in 1996 when development of the D1 started. It had a 6 megapixel sensor and kind of fit down into the bottom of Nikon film cameras. This is it mounted on what I believe is an N90. So you see it's giant and cumbersome, and kind of not the cleanest package, but kind of an elegant solution to start doing things digitally. So it's kind of cool, and it has its place, but when you look at the price tag, you realize that it's kind of prohibitively large at $36,000. Now, the 460 was one of the top-of-the-line models because 6 megapixels was a lot back in the 20th century. And there were some lower resolution models, but all of those were still upwards of $10,000 anyway. So Nikon's engineers' real goal was to get this camera to be priced affordably so that professional photographers and amateurs alike would kind of buy it. And they had had recent success with their first digital Coolpix that had only cost $1,000. That was another digital camera. So this was really kind of unknown territory, but really exciting territory at the same time. So some fun facts about the camera that I'm sure you all want to know. The resolution, this had a whopping 2.7 megapixel sensor. So this is kind of crazy when you look at this compared to modern day cameras like the D800 that has over 36 megapixels, nearing on 37. It's just ridiculous to see how far we've come. And it could shoot at 4.5 frames per second continuously for, I believe, about 20 photos, maybe 30. And it had a sensor size of 23.7 by 15.6 millimeters, which is a little bit smaller than a standard APS-C crop sensor that is used in a lot of Nikon cameras nowadays, just because they couldn't really get it to work any larger, I guess, and packaging all this in a f5 size body, which was the current film camera flagship of Nikon, that just wouldn't work with anything larger. And this was also a CCD, or charge-coupled device sensor, which is different from the modern CMOS sensors that we use nowadays. It had a maximum ISO of 1600, and at that ISO it was really grainy and had a lot of color noise, partially due to the fact that it had a weird color cast in general because it used an NTSC color system or color space instead of one of the standard RGB color spaces that we're used to nowadays. So it was just kind of weird, and it had odd colors. But it had a really good base ISO of 200, which was not bad actually. Back in the film days, 400 was considered a decently fast film, and 800 and 600 were really kind of pushing it. Or 800 and 1600 rather were really pushing it. So the camera's ISO was actually pretty good for the time. And its maximum shutter speed is actually still good in the modern day. It could shoot at 1/16,000th of a second, and I personally have never owned any camera that can shoot that quickly, so that's kind of impressive. However, its reign had to come to an end eventually, and it was replaced in February of 2001 by the D1X. Its 5.3 megapixel studio, quote, monster megapixel brother, and the D1H, which was aimed for photojournalists because it could shoot at 5 full frames per second for 40 frames. So this was kind of the logical progression. And you can see they did the same thing with the D2, releasing the D2X and the D2H. But one of the absolute coolest things about the D1, as you can see here on this eBay page, is that you can buy it nowadays, and it's actually pretty cheap. This page might try and load for a second once I click on it, so bear with me. But basically, you see from the first offer, you can buy this camera for $70 on eBay, and it probably still works decently. This guy is selling a lot of 2 down here for $150, and so that's why I'm bringing this camera up, because I think it's really cool that you could go on eBay and buy a real important piece of not only Nikon history, but camera history in general. The original Nikon rangefinders that were released in the 50s and some of them in the 60s nowadays are worth thousands of dollars because they were kind of some of the first things that Nikon made, and they were kind of quality cameras for the masses, almost sort of like the Kodak Brownie was, and all of those old cameras that came out at the turn of the going into the 20th century. So I think that the Nikon D1 might one day kind of achieve the same status, and is something really cool to see how we finished the 20th century photographically and how we turned into the digital era of photography. So I hope you've enjoyed this video and consider getting a D1, or at least look into it a little bit more, because I think it's a really fascinating camera. And this has been Connor for Avid Visions, signing out. See ya.